Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ingles SoCon Basketball Championships Tip-Off Show. I'm Chris Bainbridge, alongside the voice of the SoCon, Pete Yannity, and for the next 30 minutes, we're giving you a preview of one of the most competitive college basketball tournaments in the entire country. We at Ingles Markets have long been a proud supporter of Southern Conference athletics. The SoCon's 10 member institutions are a unique assembly of private schools, public institutions, and military academies, all dedicated to academic excellence and athletic prowess. Throughout the basketball season, we proudly bring you the Ingles preseason tip-off show, the Ingles Game of the Week, the Ingles SoCon 60, and this, the Ingles pre-tournament show. Additionally, we partner with SoCon schools to sponsor the Ingles 3-for-3 program, providing a $3 donation for each three-pointer made. We bring you the Ingles SoCon Mascot Challenge, allowing fans to vote for their school and receive a donation to the winner's General Scholarship Fund. And we sponsor the Ingles Southern Conference Basketball Championships, which are finally now at hand. At Ingles, we congratulate all the talented Southern Conference athletes who have made this season so memorable. Now, before we get into our team previews and what to expect with the tournament, we're going to take a trip back in time, going all the way back to the end of last season. Now, Pete, for those viewers who might not remember what playoff basketball was like in the SoCon in the NCAA tournament a year ago, what did we see?
Really some kind of Ingles SoCon Basketball Championships a season ago. Now, on the men's side, of course, you had the Furman Paladins, who were a juggernaut throughout the regular season. They shared the title with the Samford Bulldogs. Interestingly, the Chattanooga Mocs, who had a great center in Jake Stevens, go down in the middle of January, coincidentally enough, in a game against Furman. And really, they were just kind of building their campaign toward getting Jake Stevens back in the middle in time for postseason play. Well, as it turns out, Furman made it to the Monday night title game. Chattanooga behind Stevens, now back and healthy, got there. Tight game till the end. Furman got some key shots out of the likes of J.P. Pegues, Mike Bothwell, ending up getting a victory, knocking off Chattanooga. Significant because it was the first time since 1980 that the Furman Paladins had won the Southern Conference Tournament Championship. Well, they go on to the NCAA tourney. I remember Selection Sunday at Furman, and they were all gathered going through that experience for the first time. Pretty much everyone in the room as far as Furman was concerned. Paladins find out that they were going to go play a fourth-seeded Virginia Cavaliers team, a team that, of course, just a few years earlier had won a national title. They head down to Orlando. They hang with Tony Bennett's team. Toe-to-toe kind of ball game. And there they are, late in the contest. Virginia's got an inbound to the backcourt. Furman springs a trap. An errant pass is picked off at midcourt by Garrett Heen. Gets it on the wing to J.P. Pegues, who drains the winner.
So Furman wins their first SoCon tournament in 40 years, and then they shock the world with their Cinderella moment taking down Virginia. Fast forward several months, and the Paladins find themselves back in Asheville at Media Day, alongside all the rest of their SoCon rivals, and they're picked as the preseason favorite for the season. So, Pete, what can you tell us about everything we thought we knew back in the fall and all of those preseason predictions that were made?
Well, there was reason to think Furman could be pretty good, and they've had a very good season, although they had a couple of bumps in the road here or there and some key injuries, but they did lose two generational players. Obviously, whenever Mike Bothwell moves on from a team, that's going to be a big hole. Plus, they lost one of the great post players in recent SoCon history in Jalen Slauson, who could impact a game all over the court. They did return 7 of their top 9 scorers. And Bob Ritchie is a heck of a coach, and you knew that they were going to be right there. And with a bounce or two either way during the regular season, they might have finished with a different conference record. Other teams around them, though, returning a lot of talent, the Samford Bulldogs and the buckyball style that they play. And I'm not so sure that everyone saw the season of Vontarius Woolbright of Western Carolina has had coming, but you knew with him back, a team that had pushed Furman to overtime, remember, in that semifinal game at the Ingles SoCon Basketball Championship a year ago. Well, you knew with Vontarius Woolbright coming back, with Trey Jackson and some other potent scorers, Western could be a factor. Chattanooga was going to have some talent returning, and UNCG, don't forget about them. And really, it's kind of played out that you've had that handful of 5 or 6 teams that got through the regular season. Now here they are, and it's a wide open tournament as far as I'm concerned.
So Ingles sponsors this wonderful Media Day event up in Asheville. We name our preseason player of the year, picks for who's going to win it, and then these teams actually started playing basketball. And this season, the SoCon started off taking down some of the big names nationally in the sport, taking down teams like Notre Dame, Arkansas, Louisville, just to name a few. And as the non-conference portion to the start of the season wore on, one SoCon team started gaining national attention because, well, they just weren't losing. So what can you tell us about Samford's streak to start this season?
Pretty remarkable because they had to go on the road and play Purdue, which eventually got to #1 in the nation. They opened up there, opened up at VCU, lost their first 2. Then they rattle off a winning streak that extended past a dozen games, and for a while they led the nation with the longest active winning streak. Like any team is going to have, they hit a couple of bumps in the road in SoCon play, but they set the mark and were the front runner all the way through to winning the regular season crown outright. But Samford's a team that's unlike most in the country. They play about 11 or 12 guys every game, and we mentioned buckyball.
Boy, do they run.
They're going to press you. They're going to try to get the ball off a missed basket on one end and go to the other way. They added a really good point guard who came to them from Utah, Rylan Jones, and he's really impacted things. And they might have one of the most improved players in the country in the middle in Achor, who really has stepped up his game in another season playing for Bucky McMillan.
So the Samford Bulldogs are rattling off this amazing streak. They're gaining national headlines. And like I said, they just run and run and run and run. And then finally, that streak came to an end here in Timmons Arena at the hands of a Furman team that was itching to prove to the rest of the conference, hey, we're still here. And Pete, I was at that game, and the Bulldogs just looked exhausted. I think with that many wins piling up and that buckyball style, that perhaps with that pace, they just kind of hit a wall. But they didn't stay down for long. So what have you seen from the Samford Bulldogs this season, and how they might fare when that style of play has to extend for multiple days in a row at the tournament?
That's the million-dollar question. And of course, teams like that, again, at times you see late in the season their legs are really kind of out. Well, you got to deal with that if you're that kind of ball club. But again, I think the fact that Bucky McMillan plays 12 guys getting a pretty good amount of minutes, and really no one on their team goes much above 30 minutes a game. Now, he's got his stars in his team. We mentioned Jones, we mentioned Achor. A.J. Staten-McCray has always been an X factor in this conference as far as I'm concerned, because he can guard anyone on one end and he can score in lots of ways on the other. But I think they're the kind of team that's tooled to make a run in a weekend tournament, and who knows, as the projections as the year went on, if Samford is the team that gets the automatic bid to the NCAA tourney, I've seen them projected as high as the number 12 seed. And that 12-5 game in the NCAA tourney oftentimes produces upsets. But I put Samford in that category of the kind of team you least want to face in the month of March, because they are a team that can really put a spurt of scoring together. They've got enough inside to play with the bigger teams, especially as the year's gone on, they've developed that. And I think they're a really dangerous team in March.
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to run as much as Samford is going to make you run. And you put that up against some of these big boys in the NCAA tournament, there's really no telling what's going to happen there. Now, we already mentioned that the Furman Paladins came into this season with high expectations, but they have been, like many teams in the SoCon this season, very good, not quite great, at least not consistently. So when you lose two pros like Jalen Slauson and Mike Bothwell, you're bound to take a little step back. But
Yep.
Who have you seen step forward for the Paladins this season, and what has this year been like for them?
They had some injuries, some of those key players that returned, that I think was a big part of their story. Non-conference, they looked like they had a win against Tulane sealed, likewise against Princeton. They hung with Arkansas for a while. But the key for this year was going to be the performance of J.P. Pegues. He stepped up. Certainly Marcus Foster was counted on as a guy as a veteran in their program. He's certainly stepped up. Those guys have combined for close to 25 games of 20 points or more. Foster with a couple of 30-point games during the season, and Pegues had 33 in a tight loss at Samford. They've needed some others to really build on their games. Alex Williams has been the player that's elevated his game, a junior forward who can also step outside. You do see, though, that the inside presence, particularly of Slauson, is missing with the Furman team. But, Bob Ritchie is such a good coach. As the season's gone on, he and his staff have really worked to get the guys in the right places, distribute the minutes. But most importantly for Furman, they eventually got good health where they could finally put all those players on the floor that they were counting on. And that's the kind of team, again, dangerous at this time of the year, not only in games in Asheville, but beyond if they can get another championship under their belt, because they could be a kind of ball club as a 13 seed probably in the NCAA tourney that could be really, really difficult to play. Just ask Virginia.
All right, so we mentioned Jalen Slauson there in that run. He was the best player on the court against Virginia in that upset game. Well, he got drafted by the Kings. He's not playing at Furman anymore. Now, he was named as the SoCon Player of the Year last year, and while this year that honor has yet to be bestowed, the odds-on favorite has got to be Vontarius Woolbright from Western Carolina. He has racked up the Player of the Week honors week in and week out, it seems like. But it seems like Woolbright is just getting better and better, and it's not just him. The entire Catamount squad that made it to the semis in last year's tournament is on the prowl again this season.
They've really done a nice job balancing out their scoring, even though Woolbright has had an incredible season. Think about this, he's 6'6". For the most part this year, he's been top 5 in all of Division I in scoring and rebounding, averaging a double-double in each, over 20 points a game for most of the season, about a dozen rebounds a game. You've got to look way back in history to find the last time a non-post player or traditional post player was right up there top 5 in both those categories. He's led the nation in triple doubles, led the nation in double doubles. Affectionately, the way he plays is called bully ball. He embraces that because he'll back down a lot of guys who are even bigger and score near the bucket. But as I said, they've really done a good job balancing out the scoring because Trey Jackson is the guy who came into this season as the one you might say would be their leading scorer. Really fabulous guard who came to them from Iowa State a couple of years ago and has found a home. Russell Jones Jr. is kind of that X factor, usually the smallest player on the court, but he can get up and back. I'd put him and Chattanooga's Honor Huff in a 40-yard dash and watch that all day long, probably the 2 quickest players in the league. He's been a guy who can score for them on the outside, but also finish at the rim. And then DJ Campbell, just like A.J. Staten McCray at Samford is an X factor for them, I think DJ Campbell is kind of that forgotten Beatle, if you will, because he's a player who at any time can go for 15 or 20 points in a game. So they've spread their scoring on the perimeter. The one issue they've had is inside. They've used 3 different guys in the post, and they've all been effective, but those guys are really going to need to step up for the team to make a run at Asheville.
Well, to see what Coach Gray has done with that squad over the last several years to get their play to the level where it's at right now, it's got to be really exciting for everyone in Cullowhee. So once again this season, Ingles is setting up the Ingles Fan Zone right there at the Harris Cherokee Center in downtown Asheville. And a big part of that every year is the Ingles SoCon Mascot Challenge. As part of that, fans can view the various mascot videos and vote right there at the Fan Zone. Here's a sneak peek at what's going on with this year's Ingles SoCon Mascot Challenge.
Like, for real? I mean, that's awesome. Hey, what is he doing? Looks like he's showing off his big guns. Yeah, those are some big guns.
Goat yoga, cat yoga, puppy yoga, bring your dog. Bring your dog. This was a mistake.
Scrappy? Looks like someone TP'd his house last night.
Apparently, if you leave an apple at Minerva's feet, it's supposed to bring you good luck. Let's see what happens.
Ugh, we just got this new puppy and he's always jumping on the furniture and stealing our food.
Gosh, I'm glad Sam doesn't do that.
Toby, wake up. Practice is about to start. Hibernation is such a bear. I got an idea.
What is he doing? He's a buccaneer. He's looking for buried treasure. You found the quarter. Good job, Bucky.
The Ingles SoCon Mascot Challenge. Vote for your favorite at ingleschallenge.com.
As always, we're so appreciative to all of our great partners at all of these schools to play along with the Ingles SoCon Mascot Challenge. And it's really been a big part of the fun of this tournament. So now getting back to the play on the court, one of the teams that's been a bit of a surprise this season, I would say, has been the Wofford Terriers. So after a turbulent season last year, the Terriers are really kind of back on track and playing at a high level again this season. So Pete, what can you tell us about Wofford?
I'll tell you, Dwight Perry has done an amazing job with a ball club that saw more guys move on either to other schools because they graduated or simply have their eligibility end. You looked at this team going into the season, you were trying to figure out how to get from point A to point B. Corey Tripp has emerged as a scorer, been top 10 in the conference for most of the year. Good guard who can play well on the defensive end. I'll tell you, Kyler Filowich is one of the most interesting big men in the country. He'll be the first to tell you he doesn't have much of a jump shot, but last year when he first arrived from Southern Illinois for the Terriers, he was an enforcer inside. Up there, about 60% field goal range a game, because when they get it to him down low, he's able to bull his way in and score. And players like Jackson Civils, among others, have stepped up and added to their role. He came in as a transfer a year ago to the Terriers, kind of found his way, and suddenly he became a big story once they got into SoCon play especially. And they got some huge wins this season, some you might not have expected, but they were a big story, especially in the middle of the pack in the SoCon as the year went on. And I think really opened up a lot of eyes in terms of what they were able to do in terms of knocking off some of the others around them that you may not have expected. But I really think that Corey Tripp could be one of those guys in Asheville who has a huge impact, and you look up and they could be playing on semifinal Sunday and suddenly he's the star of the show.
Absolutely. They're a great example of it's really going to be a very deep tournament. Now, sticking in the Palmetto State, the Citadel Bulldogs had a rough go of it this season, being very competitive in most of their games, but just not being able to turn those close games into wins. So what have you seen from the Bulldogs this season?
Well, earlier in the show you mentioned that the Southern Conference did some damage against power conference teams. 5 wins in all. The Citadel, with one of those in December, they went to South Bend, Indiana, became the second SoCon school this year to get a win against the Notre Dame Fighting Irish on their home court. Yeah, late in the season, they got better, and earlier in SoCon play, they lost 2 really key players inside. Winston Hill, who had come to them from Presbyterian College, and also Christian Moore. And Ed Conroy, their head coach, will tell you he kind of had to reinvent how things were doing. They had a player come this year from Vanderbilt, Quentin Melora Brown, who became a double-doubles machine. He's done a really nice job for them scoring and rebounding, but didn't have a whole lot of help for him. They also have one of the players, I think, who's one of the unsung scorers in the SoCon, A.J. Smith, a sophomore guard, 6'4", big, again, can guard inside if he needs to, but he's one of those downhill kind of players. And I think he's been a big story in this conference that maybe folks don't know about. He's averaged about 16 a game, and every time you look up, suddenly, well, here's a guy who's in double figures and a real factor. They're one of those teams that, again, could pull off a win or two in Asheville, and I wouldn't be stunned by it based on how they got it going down the stretch. But so many of their games, they were right there and just couldn't close the deal, and that's been a big part of it.
Well, and it seems like whenever we talk about the Citadel, we always then have to talk about their big rival in the conference, VMI. So they've had a similar season as the Bulldogs, close in a lot of games, but just not notching the wins like they'd like to. So what have you seen from the Keydets?
Well, the Keydets team that was counting on Brennan Watkins to have a big season, a guard who missed last year with an injury, and he was having a good season scoring, but suddenly got an injury in the middle of February, and that kept him out for some games and kind of took them off the mark. They did get a huge home win against their arch rival, the Citadel, but Andrew Wilson simply had to rebuild this year mainly with freshmen, one of the youngest teams in the country, and some sophomores. One of those sophomores, though, is a player, Tay Jackson, who a year ago emerged as a really good rebounder for this team and added some scoring this season, but Jackson's been up around 10 rebounds a game, has become a sophomore leader on their team. He's the kind of guy that can impact a ball game on the glass, but also scoring inside or out. And Tyron Cook, one of their other freshmen who's come in this year at a guard, he's been among the top 15 or so in scoring in the league for most of the season. It's just a very young team, but again, scrappy. They've hung in a lot of games. They nearly knocked off Chattanooga on their home court during the regular season when Chattanooga came to Cameron Hall in Lexington. They played some other folks tough. And again, one of those teams that you may be up by about 5 points in the tournament on with about 8 minutes to go, but you can't feel like you're on the verge of closing the deal. Andrew Wilson has had his team playing hard all year long. If Brendan Watkins was able to get back physically to where he needed to, he's a really good shooter. He and Cook on the outside, Jackson both inside and outside, can really make VMI a tough customer.
All right, so 2 years ago, Dan Earl left VMI. He goes and takes the head job at UT Chattanooga, and he took a couple of players with him, including, Honor Huff, who we've talked about already here, and he has played well for the Mocs. Now, Chattanooga came into the season with high expectations, and they've been near the top of the conference pretty much all season long. So what's contributed to their success? What have you seen from Chattanooga?
And a Chattanooga team that earlier in the year got a win on an ACC floor by beating Louisville at Louisville. And they've kind of had a makeover in season they didn't necessarily expect, because as you mentioned, Honor Huff as well as Jake Stevens followed Dan Earl from Lexington, Virginia down to Chattanooga, Tennessee for the start of last year. Huff had to sit out due to a transfer rule within the conference. Stevens, we've already detailed his situation. He was a great contributor till he got hurt and then helped them almost win another SoCon tourney title. Then you've got Trey Bonham, who had gone from VMI to Florida, was there last year. And then Bonham transfers to Chattanooga. Well, at the start of the season, the NCAA had a rule that if you were a second-time undergrad transfer, you had to sit out for a season. They changed that in December, and suddenly Trey Bonham was eligible, goes out and in an early game hits a buzzer beater against Gardner-Webb, non-conference. Really changed the dynamic of their team, because he's a point guard who can also score. With Huff in the backcourt, they were teammates under Earl at VMI. You just see the chemistry. They give you a really tough package back there to try to defend. They're really good on the defensive end. They've seen Sam Alexis, a sophomore in the post, really come along this year, who was thrown to the fire last season when Stevens got hurt. But Alexis has become a dynamic player for them on the boards and inside. Jan Zita came to them from Pepperdine. He's 6'9", but he can step out and shoot, and they've had some others come along. But they are as dangerous a team as anyone. And again, they could be the kind of team that if they can hold up the trophy at the Ingles SoCon Basketball Championship at the end of the tournament, they could be a factor in the NCAA.
Absolutely. It seems like every year the UT Chattanooga Mocs are there when the things are coming down to the wire. Now, elsewhere in East Tennessee, we find the Bucks of ETSU. And they've battled this season in the midst of yet another coaching change. So I would say right now, again, this is a good team, a competitive team, certainly not a team to overlook, but maybe not yet quite back to the dominating team that they want to see in Johnson City. So what team have you seen from the Bucks this year?
I see a team that has, again, very good players. They didn't have that star emerge, though, as the year went on. And Brooks Savage knows all about having stars in Johnson City and being part of winning. He was there for the Steve Forbes era, and we all know about that. I mean, what a great collection of teams that Steve Forbes had there before he moved on to Wake Forest. And Brooks Savage, though, is one of those young coaches, a lot of fire about him, big on the defensive end. Ebby Asamoah is a player who's transferred in this year and been a very good player in the SoCon. They've had some other newcomers come along, really very few holdovers on their roster. But ETSU, again, is one of those teams, I'd put them in the same category as a Wofford and as a Mercer, we'll talk about in a moment, that is a difficult team to face when it's win or go home, because you might find yourself suddenly in a tight game with them, and before you know it, they hit a big three with about 2.5 to go. Now suddenly you're looking around wondering how you're going to come back against that. But Asamoah's been a good addition to this league, and he's a guy to watch out for when you watch the Bucks play.
Well, and ETSU always brings an amazing contingent of fans to Asheville.
They really do.
If they're in a game and it's close, the top's going to come off of that place, and it's going to be a loud, hard-fought battle all the way until the end of that game. So in addition to the tournament itself and all the fanfare that it takes place at the arena, Ingles is a big part of a lot of community events around the city, and one of those is the Downtown Dribble, which has become a great way for kids to get involved in the fun. So here's a quick look back at last year's Downtown Dribble to give you a little idea of what to expect this year.
This is an awfully exciting morning. We've got a lot of kids that are in downtown Asheville that are jazzed up and ready to go. They've gotten their free t-shirts, they've gotten their free basketballs, and they're about to make their way to the arena dribbling. They will dribble to the Harris Cherokee Center, Asheville. to take part of the 12 o'clock games, hopefully sticking around throughout the day through all the sessions. And each kid that participates in the downtown dribble gets a free ticket to that session, and their parents can buy a discounted ticket as well. So you come out, you dribble, you play interactive games, you see cheerleaders, you see pep bands, you see dance teams, you get to take part in all the action with your friends. And then when people get to the Harris Cherokee Center Asheville, please go see the Ingles Fan Fest. It's just an amazing experience for kids. It's enhanced this year. You're going to see an actual basketball court in there, in the Jan Davis lobby. Unlike other years, you're going to walk in and you're going to see hardwood, and you're going to have the ability to shoot baskets in there, and you're going to see all the usual stuff that's in there, the swag from Ingles, the face painters, you know, the beauty queens, the tap snap where you can take pictures, you can vote in the mascot challenge, and it's just going to be an awesome experience. We could not have the Southern Conference basketball tournament in Asheville without the sponsorship of Ingles and the great support from, you know, all the way down from their event team, Melissa and Ruby, just on down the line. Everybody at Ingles jumps in, and they take pride in this event. You know, a lot of companies will just sponsor an event and they let it stand alone. Ingles, not a chance. They get behind it, both feet in and jump into the water, and that's exactly what they do here. You'll see that whether you're at the downtown dribble, whether you're at the Fan Fest or throughout the tournament. You'll see it every phase of what is done here throughout the weekend. Ingles is involved in some shape, fashion, or form.
The Mercer Bears always bring a big contingent to Asheville for the Ingles SoCon Basketball Championships, but it's been a rough season for the Bears to this point, but they seem to be getting things back on track a little bit. This is a team that is accustomed to winning, and they've struggled to do that consistently this season despite taking down, well, some of the better teams in the conference. So Pete, what have you seen from the Mercer Bears this season?
Greg Gary, their head coach, has done a really good job kind of keeping things together, and again, one of the best tacticians in all of the SoCon. And a couple of things happened for them. They had a bunch of injuries. They added some new players, and everyone kind of had to get used to playing with each other. They started non-conference play slowly, got hot in December, and then it kind of repeated itself. They started SoCon play slowly. A big part of that, though, was the fact that Jalen McCreary, their star, their guy who can play inside or out, he had some injury issues. But you can look at early February when they had a run of home games. They had 7 of 8 at home in one stretch, and congruent with the fact that McCreary also got things going in scoring, beginning with VMI. He had a number of games where he was up around 25 or 30 points in a good stretch, and suddenly they flipped the script. But what an interesting season they've had. They were trying to get back to 500, seemingly fighting their way back to that throughout conference play. But along the way, one against Samford, 2 against a really good UNCG team. They also knocked off Furman. And so they're the kind of ball club that suddenly you look up and they're playing once again, and you see them there on Monday night playing for what would be their, if they can win it, their first ever SoCon title.
Well, it's so competitive top to bottom. I mean, you look at Mercer and some of the teams that they have knocked off, one of them being the team that we just mentioned, UNC Greensboro. So we're going to wrap things up now, talking about the Spartans. Mike Jones, well, his team took down Arkansas early on, and they have been hovering around that number 2 or 3 spot in the SoCon for most of the season. So what have you seen from the Spartans, and what do you forecast for them when they get to Asheville?
They really could have 2 wins against SEC teams because they almost had Vanderbilt in Nashville earlier in the year as well. There has been a constant at UNCG unlike any other in the SoCon over the past 4 or 5 years. The Langley twins, of course, legacies in their program. Their dad was a great player at UNCG back in the day. Keyshawn and Kobe, both excellent defensive players. Keyshawn's been the better scorer. And along with Mikkel Brown-Jones, who, if Montarius Woolbright in the SoCon, he might be the shoe-in for player of the year, but he's a guy who really can go inside and score, but also step out. I think an X factor for UNCG is Donovan Atwell, who in his second year in the program has come along as a scorer for them and has been an important piece to the puzzle and was throughout the year. But at times they were just inconsistent. They would run into some scoring lulls. At the same time, any Mike Jones team is always going to play you tough defensively. That's been a signature. And again, Kobe Langley's been among the best defensive players in the conference now.
All right, Pete. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today. And also a big thank you to the Southern Conference, all the SoCon schools, Ingles Markets, and you at home. You can get your tickets now to the Ingles SoCon Basketball Championships at SoConSports.com. For Pete Yanity, I'm Chris Bainbridge. We'll see you in Asheville.